Hey, it's Wilfer. So let's talk about this J.K. Rowling and Emma Watson thing that's been boiling up again in the mainstream, because I feel like it's reflective of a whole bigger thing that goes beyond these two public figures' beef, and why Emma Watson completely missed the mark. So J.K. Rowling wrote this story in the 90s called Harry Potter. It gets picked up, becomes the biggest bestseller in the world, books fly off the shelf, they make movies out of it. The movies take the world by storm. Everybody loves the story for the way it successfully weaves fundamental themes of honor and courage, friendship and loyalty, standing up for your principles no matter the cost, good versus evil as a messy and sometimes devastating fight with the odds stacked against you. J.K. Rowling goes from scraping by as a single mother on welfare in a cramped Edinburgh flat to being the highest paid author in the world, crossing a net worth of $1 billion by 2004. Emma Watson was born in Paris in 1990 and raised in Oxfordshire, England, after her parents, both successful lawyers, got divorced. From an early age, she showed an interest in performance and trained part-time at the Oxford branch of Stagecoach Theatre Arts, where she studied acting, singing, and dance. Although she had no professional experience before Harry Potter, she stood out in school plays and local competitions, which gave her both confidence and exposure to audition opportunities. When the casting process for Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone began, her teachers recommended her to the film's casting agents, and after several auditions, she was chosen for the role of Hermione Granger at just 9 years old. The global success of Harry Potter not only introduced Emma Watson to audiences worldwide, but also firmly embedded her in Hollywood culture. Growing up in the spotlight, she navigated the transition from child star to respected actress, balancing blockbuster fame with an academic path at Brown University and Oxford. She later diversified her career with roles in films like The Perks of Being a Wallflower and The Bling Ring, making a relatively successful attempt to move away from the wizarding world. At the same time, Watson sought to become an influential cultural figure, most notably as a UN Women Goodwill Ambassador, as well as working with He4She, an organization promoting gender equality. Meanwhile, cultural tensions had been rising as progressive ideas took up more and more space in day-to-day life, with inclusivity laws increasingly being proposed and passed in Western countries, particularly in the US. On one side, there were those who saw progressivism as an urgent and necessary path forward, a moral duty to reshape society for fairness and equality at all costs. On the other side, there were people who simply wanted to preserve a quiet, familiar way of life, holding on to traditional values and resisting what feels like rapid imposed change. And the clash between these visions had created a continuously widening rift. And in June of 2020, J.K. Rowling published a long essay online basically saying she's worried about how fast-changing ideas on gender could mess with protections for women and girls, like safe spaces in bathrooms, sports, or shelters, drawing from her own real-life experience during her early rough times. Single mom, on welfare, domestic abuse survivor, someone who had seen shelters firsthand and understood all their ins and outs. To her, it was about shielding the vulnerable, the kids, who might get caught in the crossfire of policies that blur lines too much, too quickly. And if you've ever cracked open any Harry Potter book, you wouldn't be surprised that she held these beliefs. The entire story boils down to protecting the truth, protecting the vulnerable, and standing firm in what you believe. To her supporters, the essay was a continuation of the same moral backbone that ran through her fiction. To her critics, however, it was a sign that she was out of step with modern inclusion, unwilling to embrace evolving ideas about gender identity. The fallout cemented her as one of the most polarizing figures in contemporary culture. Her legacy now caught between the magic that she had created and the cultural battles her words helped ignite. At the time that she wrote that essay, Emma Watson, now in her 30s but still widely remembered for her role as Hermione Granger, publicly aligned herself with trans rights, posting a series of tweets affirming that transgender people deserve safety, dignity, and the right to live without constant scrutiny. She also added her name to an open letter alongside other Harry Potter cast members, including the main star Daniel Radcliffe, criticizing Rowling's comments as harmful to the trans community. The reaction was swift and intense. Rowling faced an avalanche of threats online, including credible death threats, and was forced to increase her personal security out of concern for her family's safety. Behind the scenes, Emma Watson sent her a private handwritten note through a mutual friend that said, "I'm so sorry for what you're going through," thus apparently offering sympathy for the harassment Rowling was enduring and acknowledging the human toll it was taking on her. It was a gesture that suggested compassion in private, even as her public statements contributed contributed to the storm. By 2022, the tension between the two women resurfaced more visibly. At the BAFTA Awards that year, Emma Watson used her platform to declare that she was, quote-unquote, here for all the witches, a remark that many interpreted as a pointed endorsement of trans inclusion in the world associated with Harry Potter. Supporters praised the statement as a show of solidarity, but Rowling viewed it as a public contradiction of the private empathy Watson had once expressed. To J.K. Rowling, it felt like a betrayal, a symbolic act that poured fuel on an already volatile situation. The rift between them became emblematic of the broader cultural conflict. Rowling continuing to champion women's spaces and fund shelters, while Emma Watson was leaning further into global activism, particularly around youth and gender equality through her UN work. Though the direct exchanges eventually quieted down, the episode left a lasting impression of two figures who had once been closely linked by a beloved story, but were now standing on opposite sides of a deeply divisive cultural battle. Fast forward to the present moment, Emma Watson made a rare appearance on a popular podcast called On Purpose with Jay Shetty, where she finally addressed the strained relationship with J.K. Rowling head-on. It marked one of the few times that she spoke openly about the divide, breaking years of silence on a subject that had lingered in the background of both of their lives. Watson said that despite her strong public stance on trans rights and her disagreements with Rowling's views, she still, quote-unquote, treasures Jo and the personal experiences they shared early on. She framed the rupture not merely as a political or ideological split, but a loss of dialogue. She said that what hurt her most was that a real conversation was never made possible. Watson made clear that she doesn't believe in canceling people simply for having opposing views, emphasizing that no one is disposable, and advocating for treating everyone with dignity even amid deep disagreements. J.K. Rowling was quick to respond to these comments on X with a post where she laid bare the raw underbelly of their fractured friendship. She started by brushing off any expectation of lifelong loyalty from former child stars, by saying, "I'm not owed eternal agreement from any actor who once played a character that I created," and affirms Watson's freedom to back gender ideology as long as it doesn't invite violence. But the sting comes when she calls out the ongoing public critiques from Emma Watson and Daniel Radcliffe, who, years after Harry Potter had finished, still position themselves as guardians of her world, a role Rowling finds presumptuous. Drawing on her protective instincts towards the children that she knew basically from age 10, Rowling reveals that she'd long bitten her tongue, even shielding Emma Watson from backlash in interviews. But the real gut punch was that 2020 handwritten note, amid Rowling's peak terror from the death threats that forced security overhauls. To her, it felt like performative pity, a lackluster one-liner when Emma Watson had her phone number all along. She goes on to say that Emma Watson's cloistered life, guarded bathrooms, no brushes with mixed-sex words, shelters, or prisons, leaves her clueless about the stakes for everyday women, the very erasure that Rowling's essay fought. She says, and I quote, "Like other people who've never experienced adult life uncushioned by wealth and fame, Emma has so little experience of real life that she's ignorant of how ignorant she is." The irony is that Watson's podcast pivot to treasuring her makes J.K. Rowling feel like nothing more than trend hopping, as anti-Rowling heat seems to have cooled off in recent years. Without that one specific line, it looks like Rowling might have stayed silent, but instead the whole thing makes Emma Watson look hypocritical, backstabbing, and opportunistic. She wraps up the response by saying, "Disagree freely, but don't demand love after cozying up to movements that call for violence." Now, the exchange didn't just reopen old wounds, it spotlights the raw human cost of public conviction, where Rowling's unfiltered reckoning exposes the fragility of bonds forged in the public eye, while Watson's outreach shows a longing for reconciliation that's as elusive as a golden snitch in the fog. In the end, as the dust settles, their clash serves as a microcosm of the culture wars that have simmered all around us through the past decade. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.